Hey everybody, this is Christian and today we are learning how to test and troubleshoot mail servers. Because we all know how important email is in any IT system. When something is not working here, it can be a real mess for everybody. And unfortunately, it's not always easy to find out why things aren't working because mail servers can be pretty complex. There are so many different services and networking protocols involved for receiving mails, sending mails, managing inboxes, web services, and they all need to work perfectly together to provide that coherent system we simply call a mail server. So for sysadmins, testing and troubleshooting them can be a challenge. I needed to do that quite often during my time as an IT service technician, and that's why I thought let's take a closer look at how things work. We'll cover important steps in this video like looking up DNS settings, testing and capturing connections, and sending test mails directly from our terminal. After watching this video, I promise you whenever you're having trouble with your mail servers again, so no matter if that's a self-hosted one or a public server like Gmail or Office 365, you know exactly what to look for and where to start investigating. But before we start, I quickly want to talk about domain security and trust in mail communication. Because we as mail server admins, we need to fight against a shitload of problems on a daily basis like spam campaigns, phishing, rejected communications, and so on. And it's more than ever important to use technologies like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. However, in reality, not everyone is using them because they often seem complicated to set up and configure. But let me tell you, it's actually not that hard at all, thanks to EasyDMARC, who is supporting this video by the way. EasyDMARC is an all-in-one solution for businesses and MSPs who want to protect their domains and increase their email deliverability. Some of their features are entirely free by the way, so you can just sign up and use their tools for managing those records, or get detailed reporting on compliance and failures, or use their free testing tools for investigation. They also offer many cool premium features like reputation monitoring if you ever get on a blacklist, or use their managed SPF record and TLS reports. Since I'm using EasyDMARC, managing my mail server domains has become so simple and transparent. It's really a great service, so check out EasyDMARC for free and level up your domain security. Of course, you will find a link in the description down below. Okay, so first of all, let me give you some general tips for how to start your investigation, because I would always try to start with the most critical and high severity issues and then walk my way down to the lower severity issues. Because when somebody is coming to you and saying, hey, our entire mail server is down, we can't send or receive any emails, that's a much bigger problem than when one user is having problem with an inbox, yeah? And when the entire mail system is having a problem with receiving and sending mails, that is undoubtedly one of the most critical severity issues that you might face, while the latter one is maybe a bit less important than the first one. So receiving mails is the most critical severity issue, and that is because when you want to receive mails from an external mail server and the external mail server is having a problem with sending you mails, well, the external server might try it a few more times when it's having a problem, but at some point it will run in a timeout, and from that point it won't try to send you this email again. So there may be emails that are entirely lost, and you might just go back to the original sender and manually instruct them to send this mail again. And that might not always work, especially for automatic emails and notification systems and so on. So you can actually lose emails when your mail server is not able to receive any emails. Sending mails might also be an issue, but if you want to send some emails and that's not working well, you can always try again. There are no emails that are lost in this case, so I would always say like receiving mails is the critical severity issue and sending mails, this might be a high severity issue. So let's start with the critical severity case and assume that your entire mail system is down, you're not able to receive any emails from external or internal people. So what might be the issue, and how do you start troubleshooting this case? So first of all, I would always try to start at the beginning. So what actually is the first step that an external mail server might perform to send you an email? And the very first step is always looking up the MX record. So that's the DNS record that tells the external sender what is the primary address of the mail server responsible for your particular domain. So for example, if I have a domain like clcreative.de and I want to check my MX record, I would use a tool that is called NSLookup. So with NSLookup, you can look up all DNS records in any system. And then you can type in just the domain name and you will get back the results for the DNS record. And you can check that MX record in NSLookup by setting the type to MX. And now we can try to make this request to clcreative.de again. And you can see now we get back an answer. And that is for clcreative.de, the mail exchanger is that address here. And you can see this is not really an IP address. It could be an IP address, but that obviously is another DNS name that points to an IP address. And when we now want to check that IP address, we need to make another query. Now we switch back the type to the A record and ask the NSLookup tools, so can you give me the IP address for that particular DNS name? And you can see it now gets back 2 IP addresses that are load balancing emails and so on. So that's using a DNSA record to point to multiple IP addresses. And the external mail server will just try one of these IP addresses to open a connection to. So depending on what method it uses to resolve DNS records, might it be used DNS round robin or something like that. So if you don't have an MX record on your domain, so that would mean that nobody can send you emails because it doesn't know where to send them to. So the MX record that always needs to point to the correct IP address. And of course, the target mail server also needs to be listening for incoming mail requests. And that's usually performed by using the SMTP protocol, so the simple mail transfer protocol. And that is usually operating on port 25. So first of all, what we can always do is we can just use the MX record and just perform a ping request to that particular domain or to that IP address to see if the mail server is up and running. And when we do that, you can see that the ping request doesn't respond anything back. So it seems like the server would be down. You can see the ping was tried on that second IP address here. We could also try to ping the first one to see if that might be working. But you can see none of these IP addresses reports to ping requests. So in some cases, that might be an issue because the server might be down or the network requests don't reach the target. However, you can see that the ping requests are not really using the SMTP protocol, and target mail servers might not always respond to ICMP requests while they are still listening on the SMTP port 25. And the most simplest way to check if you can open or initiate a TCP connection to a specific network port, you can use the Telnet tool. So Telnet is a very simple tool to just try to open a TCP connection on a target server. So we can try it with this particular DNS name and then using the port 25. So that's the primary port for SMTP protocols. Some mail servers might also respond to other requests on different ports here, for example, for secure SMTP connections and so on. But for server-to-server transfers, it's still usually the most common way to use the port 25. When this check is successful, you can always be sure, okay, so your mail server is at least up and running and it's listening for incoming mail requests. So when an external server wants to send you an email, it will open a TCP connection on that port and try to send you an email. And you can see, so I now am connected to that mail server. So we also get back a response using SMTP code. So you can see that there's definitely is a mail server up and running and is listening. You can't be 100% sure if your mail server is accepting external emails, but when this works, you have probably done the first step to see, okay, so at least the server is up and running. When this does not work and you're running in a timeout with a telnet request, you can definitely tell there's a problem with your mail server system. That, of course, could have multiple issues and you need to investigate further in order to find out so what's going wrong. But generally speaking, you could say that maybe a firewall is blocking that port, or maybe the DNS record points to the wrong DNS name or the wrong IP address. Or what also could be the case, simply the server could be dead. So you might just connect to your mail server and see in the log. So if the mail server system is up and running, and if it is, but it's still not getting through, you might just check, so are there any firewalls or gateways in between, or would that be caused by a network issue, some kind of that problem. Anyway, when that's working, or you fixed a problem with receiving mails, you have solved the most critical severity issue. However, let's also find out how you can troubleshoot problems with sending emails from your mail server to external recipients. So if you might have problems with sending emails in general. So you could, of course, also always check, can you open a connection to an external mail server to see if the network connections are working or not. If not, you might have problems with your network connection. So if you can't connect to any mail server at all, you might have a problem with your gateway or with your firewall that's not letting port 25 through. So doing these general checks in the terminal is always very, very useful for troubleshooting things. But I would definitely say, like, for testing specific problems or issues on your mail server system, there are some tools around that you can utilize, and they will give you a nice web UI. They will perform some specific checks in parallel and give you some more insights on what could be wrong with your mail server. And I just want to name one particular, which is called MX Toolbox. So that is a free web service that I personally have always used to troubleshoot issues with mail servers. Just go to SuperTool and then type in your domain, creative.de, and then you can perform specific checks and tests that you can use. SRV lookup, certificate lookup, domain health, and those kind of things. But also shows you some tests for DMARC records, if you have published a DMARC record correctly, if the policy is enabled. And what is also pretty useful, if you have specifically problems with sending mails, maybe to not all mail servers, but to some, you might also do a blacklist check. So that could be the case if the sending address might be listed on some blacklists, and external mail servers might check these blacklists if you are on that list, and they might just reject any incoming connections from these IP addresses. And that could be a very critical problem in some cases. So if you have problems with you being part of one of these blacklists, it's sometimes a bit hard to tell them, hey, please remove my record, because you always need to prove. So if you have set up your mail server correctly, and if you're not part of any attack, or if your mail server isn't abused for spamming or something like that. I've seen that in some cases where we're having problems with some external IP addresses land on these blacklists. That might be especially the case if you're using an external IP address that is part of maybe a public cloud servers, and these dynamic IP addresses are given more frequently to other customers. Yeah, for example, if one IP address is abused by a spam attack from any other person, and the cloud provider might decide to shut down that IP address, but then, like in 2 weeks later, give that IP address to a different customer, you might run into problems without having done anything wrong at all, because you might have been just assigned a dynamic IP address that has been put on a blacklist or something like that. The next thing you should also check if you are having trouble with sending mails is doing a reverse lookup, so looking for a PTR record, and if that PTR record resolves to that same domain where you were sending emails from, because some external mail servers might also check if you have a PTR record correctly set up, and if not, they will just reject any emails. Because PTR records are not really part of the DNS system, so they don't belong to your domain. The PTR record doesn't need to be set on your DNS provider, it needs to be set on your ISP provider, so where your external IP address is coming from. If you're using a cloud provider, that's usually the cloud provider that uses these IP addresses. Or if you're running a self-hosted mail server from home, that might be your ISP provider, like your internet provider, okay? Some internet providers don't allow you to set PTR records, so that's why I usually don't host a mail server at my home. So I use an external cloud provider that allows me to easily set up a PTR somewhere. But some internet providers might still give you that possibility, especially in business contracts and so on. You would typically have that option somewhere. And with the MX Toolbox reverse lookup, you can easily check if there is a PTR record existing for that particular IP address. So when my email server wants to open a connection to an external mail server, it's coming from that source IP address, and the external mail server will perform that specific check and see if that matches with the domain that I'm trying to send an email from. So in my case, I'm using that system from Office 365, so they usually set up everything for me correctly. I don't need to do anything. It should always work. But if you're running a self-hosted mail server, you might just perform that check to see if you have trouble with sending mails. Okay, so these were the most important checks that you should always do if you're having trouble with your entire mail system. So with the SMTP protocol, that you're not able to receive or send particular emails. Now we are getting to the more medium and lower severity issues. So our SMTP server is operational and functional. We are able to receive and send mails to external clients. But some users might have trouble with their inboxes. So for example, your Outlook or Thunderbird can't connect to your mail server, or you are having trouble with sending mails from a particular client to an external one, and so on. How do you usually troubleshoot these kind of issues? And there are also 3 main protocols involved in that communication. The first one is again SMTP, so just with our entire mail server. Also for managing inboxes, so for checking emails in your inbox, there are 2 main protocols that are important. The first one is IMAP, and the second is POP3. So POP3 is really, I hate this protocol, and honestly, it's not used that much anymore. And if you can avoid it, you should definitely avoid it and instead use IMAP, because IMAP allows you to have more advanced features like push connections, and POP3 is really, I would say it's an outdated protocol, but still it's sometimes used in specific scenarios, so you might check this on particular legacy clients or something like that. But usually for collecting inboxes, IMAP is the primary protocol, and you should always use whenever it's possible. For example, these are the settings for Outlook.com, and that will tell what I need to configure on my email client to set up the POP, IMAP, and SMTP settings for my Outlook client correctly. And you can see, so when I open this here, you can see there are a couple of addresses here. For the IMAP server is listing on outlook.office365.com on port 993. So this is using a TLS encryption. So you're not able to connect to the legacy IMAP port that is using an unencrypted connection. So that's a good thing. And of course, for POP3, that's also the case. It's using a TLS encryption on port 995. And for SMTP, it's using port 587. So this is the submission port, and that's always used for client-to-server connections on SMTP. Remember, again, server-to-server connections are usually using port 25. And you can see, so this is using a start TLS encryption. So not TLS, that's also different. Sometimes you might also see the port 465 for SMTP SSL connections, so that might also be the case. But mostly modern mail systems for client-to-server connections are using port 587 and using start TLS encryption. Different cloud providers might have different settings for all these different ports and addresses here. For example, on Gmail, you also need to perform some additional settings that allow you to connect with an IMAP client to your Gmail account. So you need to perform these 4 steps here. And then you also need to add the specific addresses that Gmail uses for IMAP and SMTP transfer. And again, if you're having problems with these entries, so if the client can't connect to these particular ports, if you're having trouble with this, that might be firewalls that might block the connection, all sorts of network issues, maybe VPN connections that you need to set up first to connect to your internal mail system whatsoever. So there are so many different things that could go wrong here, but what you could always check is, for example, I can just grab this name here and open a telnet connection on the port 587 and see if I can connect to that server. And you can see, yes, I got a connection. So this client where I'm connecting from should be able to connect to the correct SMTP port on my mail system. So that should be working. However, you might be able to open a network connection to the SMTP server to send emails from your client. But what if the email server rejects your requests and you don't really know? So what is the issue? There are different kinds of SMTP commands that you can send and receive. You can even use Telnet as a communication tool to send commands to your mail server and see what's coming back. So you can actually start your investigation at the point where it fails. So for example, the first command that is like a greeting command to send the mail server, hey, hello, and I want to send emails through your system, that is the elo or hello command. So you can use that and simply type elo and then followed by the domain you want to use to send emails from. You can see when you hit enter, the mail server accepts your request and responds with an answer. Some of these commands you can look up. I've also written a documentation cheat sheet for sending SMTP commands to an external mail server, so you can definitely check it out on GitHub, link in the video description down below. So that might help you to troubleshoot SMTP issues from clients. You can, by the way, of course, also use this technique to connect to the port 25 of your receiving mail server, so to test if your mail server is able to receive and accept any emails from external systems. But most of the time when you are troubleshooting client issues, you will probably connect to the SMTP server where your client sends emails through, and you can test with sending a test mail if that's working. But one thing that you should never really do is using Telnet to send these commands, because Telnet, that is just using a simple TCP connection without any encryption at all. So you can see that the Gmail server accepts this, but if I try to authenticate, it will usually reject this and send back 530 with a you must issue a start TLS command first. So I will need to connect with an encrypted connection to Gmail to be able to send test emails through their system. So for opening an encrypted connection to the receiving SMTP email server of Gmail, we're using an OpenSSL command. So this is a command that will open an encrypted connection using a client command. We will use the start TLS protocol, and these two flags are important for sending the right commands and line breaks and so on. I don't need to explain that. And then simply connect to a particular mail server. So at the host variable, we will just replace it with our smtp.gmail.com, and the port 587 should also be correct, so that's what we've used before. So let's try to issue an encrypted connection with our mail server. And you can see the server will respond with its server certificate. It will check the certificate chain, of course. So this is OpenSSL is always checking if the certificate is correct. So that might also be an issue. So maybe you have a mail server running, the connection can be opened, but the certificate is expired or anything like this. So that you can easily check with an OpenSSL command. So very, very simple. And at the end, you can see you also got a terminal where you can send commands to. Again, we will start with a greeting elo gmail.com, and you can see that comes back from the Gmail server. Now you can see that response looks a bit different than the response before, because before we were using an unencrypted connection. So now we are able to authenticate. And what is important is, and that is a Gmail specific thing, you can't just authenticate with your Google account. You need to authenticate with an app password. So that's why I've shown you this article here before. So you need to create and use app passwords. You need to set up a two-step verification first, sign in with your account, and then create an app-specific password that you use in the legacy email client. And of course, you also need to turn on IMAP, otherwise you're not able to connect. So if you have done all of this, we can simulate an authentication using our encrypted connection, and we will use the auth login. So this will get back a response that looks a bit cryptic, so whatever that means, but don't worry, I'm going to tell you. So what we can simply do is we just copy this here, put it in an echo command, and then pipe this to a base64 decoder. And what comes back is the decoded string of the prompt here. You can see the Gmail server prompts us to enter our username, and now we can simply just type in our email address to authenticate. And what I'm now doing is I will use a test email that I've just generated for this demonstration here. So I will delete this email after the recording the video, so don't worry about it. I'm using the email account t47 blah 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 at gmail.com, and I will pipe this through a base64 encoder, so not decoder, encoder, and that gets us the base64 string. Let's just copy this and type this here into the prompt. And now we get back another response. So when we decode this, the target server prompts us for entering the password. So now we need to enter the password for our mail account. Once you got back that response accepted, so that means you're successfully authenticated to Gmail, and you can start sending test mails or also real mails through the SMTP Gmail server directly from your terminal. Pretty cool, right? You just need to follow the correct syntax here. That always starts with mail from, colon, and then the email address. So I will just use my test account here. So now the Gmail SMTP server checks if you can send emails from that sender's address here. So that's correct. The next line is our recipient to, so that means to what email address do we want to send this? And I will just use my business email address for testing. And that also means, okay, we are allowed to send emails to that particular sender's address. So if you're having trouble with, for example, you are not allowed to send emails from that address or so, you would get an error here. And that is how you can easily troubleshoot. So if you have correctly configured your sender's address, and now we can also simulate a simple email. So we always need to start with the data string. So now the email server tells us go ahead. So now we can start writing our email. For example, subject is, this is a test email. And now we can start writing the body. So what should be included in that email? So this is just a simple test if we can send emails. Okay, you always need to stop that with a dot. So that means the Gmail servers hopefully accepts your test email. So you always need to follow the correct syntax. Otherwise, you are seeing problems here. And if you haven't followed that correctly, your email server will just reject that test email. But now you can see this is okay. So Gmail responded back. So yeah, the email was hopefully sent out. And now we can open the client and see if we got that email. And as you can see, this is our test email that we've just sent through the terminal. Really amazing, right? I've opened this in Apple Mail. You can see this is coming from my test Gmail account. However, you can see this undisclosed recipient. So this is happening because I haven't specified the recipient sender's name in the email body text. You could definitely do that if you want to try that out. But anyway, I think this is totally fine as a proof of concept. So that shows that our mail server system has successfully transmitted this test email to the recipient's mail server system. And that should indicate our mail server system is functional and operational. So these were the most important steps you should always perform if you are having trouble with your mail server system, either with receiving any emails at all, which is a critical severity issue you should always check out first, or some high severity issue with sending mails to any external mail server, or then some medium and lower ones with specific email clients, inboxes, those kind of problems. Of course, we haven't covered all the different edge cases here, especially things that involve self-hosted infrastructure, because it is just so complex. There are so many things that could go wrong here with your network infrastructure, the operating system, the services, the daemons. But I think for general email investigation, this video should help you to at least have a starting point of how to check these specific systems and try to narrow down a way to the actual root cause. Now, if you're still having problems, of course, you can always join our Discord and reach out for help, so maybe some other people can help you with their experience. And I hope you enjoy these free tutorials I'm creating for you. By the way, if you want to support my mission, then please don't forget to like and subscribe, share it. And if you want to financially support me, we recently added a couple of nice benefits for all the Patreon supporters here on the channel, like ad-free early access to all of my videos, a member-exclusive chat, and those kind of things. Thanks to all the people who support my tutorials. You're really the best. And as always, thanks everybody for watching. I wish you a nice day and I catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.